In this video, I'm going to be discussing the innate innovativeness that pertains to both individual differences but also universal characteristics of individuals that start as early as infancy, but also to help to distinguish individuals through innovations and the kinds of innovations and types of innovations that can be clustered or characterize a certain set of patterns of behavior involved in engaging interests and self-expressions that originate from the minds of individuals, which express the unique characters as well as symbol and representations of their consciousness, as well as their individual psychological mind that also reflects characteristics of the epigenome and expressions of the epigenome, as well as dynamical interactions that involve these triadic or reciprocal relations between the variables of perception, as well as embodying behavior and dynamical bodily processes and the physical environment that all pertain to very different characteristics. And we can start to cluster a whole set of differentiable variables, distinct, individually different variables within groups of three that we can process within the triadic reciprocal model, such as under perception, we can consider information processing characteristics of personality, an individual's character or intellect, how they express themselves, the types of ideas or ideations of that individual. That can also reflect problem solving and higher order cognitive skills that involve complex processing of information and interaction with information in the surrounds through primarily a top-down causal pathway that is more agentic and pertains to the volitional mind capacities, which are direct to this voluntarism that is at the heart of psychology and the inception of psychology, in particular the intercept in regards to the subjective-objective link that pertains to any form of concrete psychology and substantive subject matter that influences the surrounds in any sort of meaningful or purposeful way through processes involving psychological energy and energy expenditures that metabolize and physically influence the surrounds through causal pathways that are characterized strictly by psychological factors and psychological factors that pertain to these information processes that are direct to both an integration between consciousness, such as what we're aware of and directly aware of, but also integrated consciousness that pertains more to the self and our perceptions and our agentic capacities that involve this making sense of information, not just being aware, but making sense of that information and perceiving it as into categories of meaning, knowledge, as well as what is true and what exists and is valid and is not just true, but in which we can interact with it tangibly and gives it an existence proof that's instantiated and substantiated and comes to exist through processes that are integrated within the nervous system and its contact to the physical surrounds, and which perceives it directly through sensory perceptors and our direct perceptions, in which we come to direct understandings of information and form knowledge directly through existence, and existence that's continued and stores information through a functional psychological process, which refers to something that is more approximating of the physical surrounds and therefore is moving towards higher integration of what's more objectively true rather than less objectively true and more subjectively true. So the subjective truth is proportioned in relation to the objective truth in terms of understanding the physical surrounds, and we come to understand the physical surrounds primarily through meaning, as well as the existence validation of that that then substantiates the structures that allow us to form these knowledge categories and retain information in a way that's intelligible and allows us to process information in these higher order complex fashions that are integrated within that perceptual causal variable. And the dynamic bodily aspect of the triadic reciprocal model pertains more directly to our epigenome, and also what we tend to, for a large part, be unconscious, or which we tend to also have more of these semi-automatic functions in which we may have engaged in cognitions more deliberately previously, but due to learning and efficiency processes that are deeply important for innovation and innovative thinking, have lessened the load insofar as it's easier to access certain repertoires that become more behavioral and require less cognition or top-down higher order thinking, and can also to some degree engage in this bottom-up communication that's reciprocal with top-down thinking, and be characterized by a whole different set of causal factors in relation to bodily and behavioral dynamics. And this characterizes the behavioral end of the triadic reciprocal model, which pertains more to the body and aspects of biological determinism, and which has at the heart, so you could see the cognitive and the behavioral aspect is really at the heart of any sort of philosophy of psychology, because it takes that Wundtian idea of parallelism between mind and body, and particularly what's going on in the head and inferable there, to what's physically perceivable directly through our sensory perceptors, and what's conceivable in a physical locality of our surroundings, and which is congruent and compatible with the receptors, our visual receptors, and also our capacity to either or and process information through our minds, and apprehension of that information that is true and physical and really actually the case within our physical surrounds, in which we can establish knowledge rather than just merely perceive something and it be subjectively true but less objectively true. So when we perceive stuff in our physical environment, because we are trying to sustain our own survival of not just, say, the body but also the mind, there's a tendency to establish knowledge in a way that sustains the total operations or metabolisms of the organism, rather than, say, try to just know or apprehend something in a way that's more conceptual, or we might come intuitively to mind when you're thinking about how we come to knowledge at all, because there's this tendency to, in the pursuit of actually trying to arrive at truth, ignoring how we actually naturalistically do so by temporarily disinhibiting or ignoring the faculties of consciousness and the psychological mind, and attributing what an indifferent atom that is not conscious or has these psychological processes would be like if it were to experience, say, the same set of knowledge or problems or puzzles or even interests that an individual is engaging in. And this is problematic because it throws us in the wrong end of a paradox, in which we end up contradicting ourselves in the pursuit of knowledge, assuming that we can actually arrive to what's true through a method of indifference that doesn't actually apply, and where we should apply our indifference is more to our own regulations of the self in regards to, say, a particular feeling that something should be a certain way, which is more pertaining to attachments and not so much what might arise spontaneously with an insight or with knowledge. It's more about understanding what is actually the case and true in relation to what we're defining or describing. And because we're discussing the nature of knowledge and truth, we have to make sure that we are always understanding that within the context of where that's occurring, and that must occur in the psychological mind and consciousness. So what's aware of this information, making sense of this, and it's through understanding that we have these necessary metabolisms and need to consume energy along with resources, and there's expenditures to that which place physical demand, characteristics, and properties onto our existence, that through existence first we come to truth necessarily, and we do that through a dynamical model that can only exist by the processes of the psychological mind, and which first require us to describe and will define each part of that system to be able to explain or make sense of that. And luckily, there's only a few parts that we really need to be able to begin to well define an infinite set of characteristics in pretty much everything we can think of, with only a small set of causal variables. But it's not like there's a single causal variable, and that's also important to understand. And when we're thinking about the nature of truth, this begins to make sense, because we're these separate organisms in a physical environment, right? And this is going back to that triadic reciprocal deterministic model, and we can think of the environment as having various components of it, but there's a general, say, landscape in which there's environmental stimulation and more of a background or a backdrop, and then there's objects in the environment that are individual sources of environmental stimuli or environmental objects, and those can be more dynamical per se, depending on the context and the type of environment. And then a general environment might have more different characteristics and situated characteristics to it, as well as conditions or states it's in. When we're considering, say, room temperature, weather, light exposure, the amount of light, or the air quality, or the sense. So any type of sort of particle or lack of particle in the air. It can also include sound, right? There can be a restriction of sound, there can be lots of sound, there can be unique sounds, animal sounds, and sounds can be, depending on the environment, more stable or less stable, less consistent from each other, and that might tend to occur more outside than inside. Just like, say, you might have more difficulty even holding a napkin down if it's a windy day outside, or if you're outside anyway, compared to if you're inside, because there's more likely to be a breeze or a gust outside, and this changes the dynamic in the various situations through environmental stimuli. But that's very different than, say, interacting with some item that you find on the ground somewhere, that once you interact with it, even though it's a part of the environment, the structure of the environment, the second you interact with it, there's a transition to which it also becomes partly behavioral, and it becomes part of a tool, and there's an extension of our minds. And to a large part, there's a large causal factor from cognition that's being sourced from the mind. You'll notice when you grasp something, maybe it's a ball that you find at a park somewhere, your model of that ball when you pick it up will extend from your hand to it, and you might also start to get certain ideas or think with your hand simply by grasping that ball or making contact with it. That structure, that physical structure, and in doing so, you also change various characteristics of it that are related to thermodynamic laws. You increase the amount of entropy, the amount of heat that's also being transferred from your body to it, that's radiating. You might also sweat on it, but you make it more kinetic, right? So you're literally putting energy through that ball when you pick it up. And this all falls under that triadic reciprocal model. And we can start to see that there's no single cause for anything there, because somebody could have thrown you that ball and you could have caught it without, like, by reflex, say. So you may have never interacted with that ball through your initial cognitions, but maybe primarily through a route of behavior, or say even the environment had it struck you for whatever reason. There are very different ways we can go about construing causation and understanding the nature of knowledge. And when it comes to innovation very much pertains to this dynamic that involves learning that is innate, and innate in relation to our individually different cognitions that are sourced from our individually different psychological minds and are predicated on this model of agency, which the triadic reciprocal model of causation originates from, an understanding and a study across multiple situations and cases in regards to identifying and describing and well explaining the causal variables and the innateness of individual agency and its positive influence on well-being, and generally promoting positive health and physical as well as psychological functioning through granting individuals greater autonomy, focusing on strengthening strengths and improving particular qualities that are functional within individuals and which they deem to be positive, and which tend to promote positive emotions and affects such as life satisfaction, high quality life satisfaction, positive emotions and affects such as joy or feelings of pleasantness, enthusiasm, but that's more captured by personality dimensions. It's mostly, when you're looking at subjective measures of well-being, it's pretty much life satisfaction and quality of life, where the affect scale generally aggregates positive emotions such as happiness, but that doesn't necessarily capture all the positive emotions when we're looking at psychology. And personality study tends to delve more deeper into specific emotions and how they operate in various situations in regards to various topics and situations. So a lot of times if well-being research is being done, depending on the paradigm, like say even if we're looking at agency, which is an individual difference, there might not be as much emotions included in the study. It's more likely that it's going to be aggregated, and then there's going to be individuals that are going to look generally at positive emotions. So agency generally typically has been studied in more of this subjective well-being domain rather than in terms of when we're looking at affect and emotion. And there's probably a lot of individual differences in terms of particular types of positive emotions, such as interest, which is very, very important for autonomy, and meaningfulness, a sense of meaningfulness and purposefulness that would be expected in individuals who are agentic. You'd probably also see a lot of energizing emotions, such as enthusiasm, these engaging, enthusing emotions, even maybe feelings of awesome, excitement, ecstasy. Those are all high energy emotions that can produce states of high levels of creativity and distinctive cognitive processing. They tend to be more agentic and volitional, and they free up our capacities to think and interact with the world in novel and expansive ways that are conducive to innovative behavior, by not just processing information differently than how we may have before, or how we've went about interacting or, say, honing in on a particular set of interests, shaping the environment through our interactions with our mind and our psychological mind with the surroundings that are occurring through pathways of our dynamically engaged body, which is, by the way, where we're reciprocating these emotions and also getting that affect that's associated with the positive feelings of agency. It's also, by the way, associated with what's called psychological capital, and that pertains to positive psychological functioning, and that's directly associated with well-being and our capacity to proactively and effectively perform various tasks, and also move towards alignment of our self-direction and achieve success and also become more masterful in our pursuits. So psychological capital has a lot more to do with our wellness repertoires and what we have direct access to be able to overcome difficult situations, but also address any potential problems. And it's very important for innovative behavior, but not just innovative behavior, innovative interest, thinking, innovative emotions, feelings, the effects of engaging in any form of innovation, be it through our minds or self-expressions, behaviors, how we interact with the environment through innovative ideas or thoughts or objects that are created, inventions, things that we produce or create in any way, bake or cook even, you can think of it like that, any form of even artistic or design work. Those are all based off the same basic ingredients that involve distinctive, novel, and useful cognitions or ideas. So the information set that's put out in objective physical structures through the workings of our mind or behavior, and which have generally tend to improve efficiency in a particular domain that's specific to a purpose. So innovation, it's not just useful, it tends to be, because it's novel and distinctive, tends to also improve upon previous systems, or within the moment is good enough to be able to do what it needs to do given the resources that we have or that's available at a time. So there's a domain of innovativeness that has more to do with resourcefulness and situated conditions, and particularly speculative truths, rather than this more thought out in type of